and welcome back to Megan Haskell's Book Club. I decided that's what I'm going to name my channel. Today, we are continuing the story from Aether Bound, The Rise of Lilith, Book 1. If you like hearing me read my own books aloud, please make sure you like this video and subscribe to my channel so that you get every week's episode or chapter. But now, on to the main event. Here we go. Chapter 2. I was counting out the tips at the end of the night when a trombone case thumped onto the bar. Crazy night, eh? Silas asked. The rest of his band was standing around chatting with the servers, Virginia and Gabby, as they packed up the last of the gear. The two women had already wiped down the tables and flipped the chairs on top so the barback Fergus could mop the floor later. They were only waiting for me to divvy up the tips and they'd be out of there. Yeah, crazy. I thought of the napkin in my pocket. Ever since that woman had disappeared, I'd had a sense of dark foreboding, like her words were prophetic or something. I could usually identify the crazy and ignore it, even pacify it, but something had been different with this one. Despite her wild hair and bohemian outfit, she hadn't seemed mentally deranged. Her eyes had been unclouded, her words clear. She hadn't even had a demon on her shoulder, yet something about her niggled at the back of my mind. Silas rubbed his thumb across the polished wood. The band's heading over to the old barn. Gabby and Virginia are coming, maybe Ty. Feel like joining us? My skin heated. I couldn't meet his gaze. I stared down at the money in my hands. Silas was sweet, and Virginia wasn't wrong. He was hot in a nerdy band geek kind of way, with his battered fedora and awkward smile. It was just, I couldn't let myself get close to people. I knew too much all the time, thanks to my gift. I'd learned a long time ago to keep it a secret, but every so often something slipped out. And when it did, the people I cared about ran for the hills. Or tried to lock me up. It was easier not to care, not to get involved, no matter how much I wanted to. Not tonight, I replied. I'm exhausted. One of these nights, I'm going to convince you to go out. With us, I mean. I pressed my lips together to keep from smiling. I still couldn't meet his gaze. Maybe. Well, if you change your mind, you can call me. I'll keep my phone on. Silas slapped his hand down on the wood before grabbing his case. Have a good night, Lil. I glanced up as he stepped back from the bar. His gaze met mine. A zing of electricity prickled along my nerves. I really do hope you change your mind. An encouraging smile pulled at the corner of his lips as he dipped his chin and turned away. Regret and longing washed through me, but I didn't call him back or change my mind. It was all for the best. Really. As soon as he was out of earshot, Bruce sidled up, still wiping down the last of the wet but clean glasses. You know, someday you're going to have to give that boy a chance. I shrugged, looking up into the 6-foot Samoan's face before giving him the same answer I gave Silas. Maybe. I handed him his own stack of bills, which he shoved into a pocket. But I noticed you're not going out with them either. I'm an old married man. You're 30, only 2 years older than me. And you've been married for what, 6 months? I bet your wife is still awake and waiting for you. And we have better ways of spending our time than paying too much to get into a party. Bruce waggled his eyebrows and grinned. But I'm not talking about you going out with them. I'm talking about you going out with him. Silas has had his eye on you for months. Cut him some slack, would you? I patted the big man on his muscled shoulder as I passed behind him to exit the bar. I'll think on it. Bruce insisted on driving me home. Virginia and Gabby had gone with Ty and the band about half an hour earlier, so it was just the two of us, and I appreciated the gesture. I only lived a couple miles away, and I had my bike, but at 3 a.m. on a Saturday near the beach, you never knew what could happen. I'd had a few self-defense classes and always carried pepper spray, but Bruce had a truck, and I was on his route home. As we exited the bar, flashing police lights caught our attention. Laguna Beach was usually pretty quiet this time of night. Even the highway was mostly deserted. I wonder what happened, I asked, staring out at the red and blue strobes. It was hard to tell from a distance and in the dark, but it looked like whatever it was on the rocks at the base of the cliffs that overhung the water. 3 ATVs had gathered around the area, and flashlights swept their beams across the craggy boulders. Without really thinking about it, my feet moved in that direction. I wasn't normally a looky-loo, but something about the scene called to me. "We're over here," Bruce called. He'd already thrown my bike into the back of the truck and was standing at the driver's side door. I waved him off, my gaze locked on the rocks. A woman's scream echoed off the rock face. A man shouted. The words were lost, but fear and anger vibrated through the night air. There was something else in there, something that felt old and wrong. I took off running. Luckily, the crosswalk light was already flashing. I dashed across the highway and ran out on the sand. "Lil!" Bruce shouted. I ignored him. He followed anyway. The woman screamed again. This time I could hear the water gurgling in her throat before she was silenced. The cops were moving up the rocks. "Let her go," one of them shouted. A hulking shadow leaned over the end of the pile of rocks that bled out into the water. At just after 3 a.m, it was nearing low tide, and the rocks were more easily accessible. Still, the cops scrambled to reach the struggling pair. As I approached the scene, a cop turned, her hands held out wide. "Stay back," she warned. "There's nothing to see here. The beach is closed, so go on home." My gaze never left the rocks. I focused on the scene, adjusting my vision to parse the shadows and take in the details. "I know them." "They were in the bar tonight," I replied. It was the woman with the tear-smudged mascara and the biker guy. One of them, anyway. The cop's expression immediately narrowed into interrogation mode. "What bar?" "The Trident. I'm a bartender. They were ejected for fighting. I didn't see anything." I looked back over my shoulder. Bruce was walking toward us, his expression wary. He must have stopped to take off his shoes. Smart. I was going to be cleaning sand out of my sneakers for days. "He stopped it," I said, throwing a thumb over my shoulder and the poor guy under the bus. The cop immediately moved to intercept Bruce, and I was left to sneak a little closer. I wasn't looking to interfere with whatever the cops were doing, but there was still something about the struggle that drove me on. I couldn't leave it be. The woman was in the water, her head barely breaking the surface. Each time she tried to pull herself up, the biker guy pushed her back down. He'd lost the leather jacket he'd been wearing, but the thick-soled black boots must have been enough protection to let him clamber across the rocks that the cops now struggled with. Oddly, the man's face was almost completely devoid of expression. He didn't make a sound. Only his eyes were pinched around the corners, as if in concentration, like he was trying to solve a puzzle with no solution. A shadow twisted through his body. His back spasmed. For a fraction of a second, the biker's expression shifted from nothing to fierce glee, then back. "Did you see that?" I asked. The cop speaking with Bruce turned to face me. "See what?" She hadn't been watching. The man was possessed, and I was the only one who knew it. My hand drifted to my pocket. It might have been my imagination, but the napkin felt warmer than it should have. I concentrated on the man's face, willing the demon to show itself again. Ever since that night, the night I got my scar, I'd been able to see the spirits that twisted people to their purpose. Some of them were good, even virtuous. The angel on your shoulder, so to speak. Some were not. Most did no real harm. Like the divorcee at the bar, they were desires made real, or at least real to me. No one else could see them. Never before, however, had I seen a demon inside a person's skin. I thought of all the horror movies I'd ever seen. It wasn't many. I really didn't need to add to the nightmares in my head, and shuddered. I was no priest to give an exorcism. I was just a bartender, an average one at that. Still, if I was the only one who could see what was really going on with this biker dude and his lady, I had to do something to help. My feet had taken me to the edge of the water. Waves lapped at my toes. Already, my sneakers were soaked. I stared out at the couple on the rocks and the police who had nearly reached them. The biker guy muttered something. I thought I heard the word sacrifice and maybe depths. If that was his goal, he had very nearly succeeded. I waded in up to my knees. They were still 20 yards away, maybe more, but I could see him more clearly. And more importantly, I could see her. Her movements were growing weaker, the time between breaths longer. The cops were almost there, but it wouldn't be enough. She wasn't going to last. On instinct, I looked up into the night sky. Wind whipped around me, tossing loose strands of hair into my mouth. I gazed at the full moon. I don't know why, but I'd always thought of the moon as female. Her soft light was gentle and calm, not the fiery burn of the sun. Not that women couldn't be fiery, of course, but there was something about the moon that felt soft and feminine. Lady, I whispered, feeling silly and a bit too woo-woo for my own taste. Despite my strange skill, I'd never been into tarot or spiritual mumbo-jumbo. If you're there, your daughter needs you. Don't let her drown. Don't let her fall to that possessed brute. Help her. It wasn't an elegant speech. I had never been great with words, but hopefully it would be enough. I looked to the design on the napkin, which seemed to glow ever so slightly. It was probably my imagination. But I traced the image with a finger and then sent my thoughts out to the drowning lady in the red polka dot top. Whatever strength my little gift might have, I willed it into the woman. Her arm flailed, hitting the biker's shin. She latched on, heaving herself up onto the rock just enough to keep her head above water. The biker kicked his foot out, connecting with her shoulder, but she didn't let go. He kicked again, but his other foot slipped, the rubber of his boot succumbing to the slick seaweed and bird crap that probably covered every inch of the rocks that far out. The biker landed hard, just as the police came in range. One pinned him to the rocks while the other helped the woman. She sobbed, clutching at the officer's shoulders. Her once perfect curls hung limp around her shoulders. You're going to have to come with me, the female officer with Bruce called from behind him. We'll need a statement about the assault at the Trident. With the woman safe, the desire to watch what was happening disappeared. I didn't really see anything, like I said. I shuffled my way across the sand to Bruce's side. By this point, my sneakers were completely ruined, which sucked because they were practically brand new. All the same, you were there, the officer replied. It'll be easier to go now rather than track you down later. End of chapter 2. All right, I hope you enjoyed that reading. Again, please like and subscribe if you did, and I will see you next week.